Hello, and welcome to another episode of Winter is Writing. Going to be talking about Game of Thrones tonight, so there are definitely going to be some spoilers. Just a warning, so if you care at all, run away, come back later. Another little bit of housekeeping. In June, my Facebook Lives are going to move to my business Facebook page. So if you want to catch these live in the future, please go to my Accountability Muse Facebook page and like it, and then you'll be able to see the lives starting in June there instead of here on my personal page. Awesome. So all month long, I am talking about the writing process, like the actual work of writing instead of necessarily craft. But because of a conversation and multiple conversations I've been having since last Sunday, tonight's going to be a little bit of both. I'm going to be talking about the writing process, a little bit about the difference between pantsing and plotting or outlining, and also a little bit about Game of Thrones. Particularly the most recent episode, which was episode 5, season 8. Is this season 8? Last season. Anyways. So yeah, go ahead and get started. So, pantsing and plotting. This is one of the simplest way to kind of define what kind of a writer you are. If you're a pantser, it means you kind of take the seed of an idea and you just write forward, stream of consciousness, learning the story and the characters as you go. This often has the inherent problem that your plot is weak, but your characters are really strong because the characters are basically dictating where the story goes. My video is getting a little choppy on my end, so if anybody is having a hard time seeing or hearing me, please put in the comments. Thanks. Whereas a plotter or an outliner is someone who plans a story in advance and then they write it. But that has the problem where characters can be weak. I know I'm more of a plotter or an outliner, and I do tend to struggle with making stronger characters because of just that's how that works. Now, where this comes into play in Game of Thrones, someone shared a really interesting Twitter thread with me. And they were basically talking about the difference between George R.R. Martin, who himself is a pantser, and the showrunners for the Game of Thrones HBO show. And they're likely more like plotters. So, and how that might explain the gap in quality since the show has moved beyond the books and they're no longer adapting George R.R. Martin's work. They're actually generating the rest of the story themselves. And it's a really interesting argument, and I like it, so I'm going to detail it a little bit. The idea being that George R.R. Martin plants seeds and he sees how they grow. He uses the metaphor of tending a garden, right? Which is really great, and it's why Game of Thrones has become such a big deal, is because it's not plot driven necessarily. Like, obviously plot things happen, but the characters and their choices are creating all of the complexity in the plot. They're not being driven by the plot. The characters are the ones creating it as they go because they're unique and are getting into interesting situations, that kind of thing. So the current theory goes that the showrunners, once they ran out of material to adapt, they had a finite amount of time to finish the show. And how long they had to finish the show is also problematic because just not even a full 2 seasons is just not enough time to wrap up that story. But that's an entirely different argument that I could spend like an hour talking about. So they had 2 seasons left to finish the show. And this Twitter person, their theory was that the showrunners came up with kind of like their bucket list items that they wanted to happen in the ending of the show. And then they reverse engineered from there to bridge the gap between the ending that they wanted and the show that they had built. Like, how do we get from point A to point B? And that, yes, in my opinion, can explain why it's gone so downhill. Like the most recent episode, episode 5, was awful. In my opinion, this is very subjective. In my personal opinion, it was so bad, I don't consider it canon. Like, it was just so out of left field and not at all what I feel like the show has come to be and needed to have happen. I don't know. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a second. But going back to plotting versus pantsing, I am very much a plotter, and that's actually how I approach Rose City Swing, for instance, because for Rose City Swing to be satisfying, each day of the weekend has to be better than the previous day, right? And that means escalation. But for me to be able to do that well, it's really helpful for me to understand what the ending is so I can ramp back the previous days. So with the murder mystery, the first year, I knew going into it that I wanted to give Brad, my detective character, a soliloquy worthy of Tim Curry in the movie Clue. If you've not seen Clue, it's an excellent, excellent comedy, and I highly recommend go watch it. Watch all the multiple endings that it has. But I wanted to give Brad an ending scene like that, where all the pieces came together, the mystery was solved, and it was also incredibly entertaining. And so I had to build up to that point on Friday and Saturday, so not only did the ending make sense, but it was a payoff, and it was satisfying. And Friday and Saturday, comparatively, had to be not as awesome as Sunday for Sunday to be amazing. Like, if I start out too strong on a Friday or a Saturday and I don't escalate from there, it doesn't get better over the weekend, I have done my job poorly. And I feel like that's kind of what has happened in this weird pantsing to plotter transition in Game of Thrones. So I totally understand why this theory might explain why Game of Thrones has gone so downhill the past 2 seasons, and especially most recent episode. But I don't think that necessarily is a justification for it to be bad, because now I'm probably going to start talking about the sitcom How I Met Your Mother in a second, just as a warning, because I feel like they had similar issues and they're easier to talk about. But okay, all right, I'm gathering my thoughts as I'm talking out loud. So in the show How I Met Your Mother, more spoiler warnings, so if you care, run away now. It was this whole show, I mean, it's in the premise is in the title, How I Met Your Mother. It's about how Ted meets the mother of his children, who he's telling the story to, right? He's telling them how he met their mother. And it goes without saying that the expectation is, by the end of the show, we, the audience, will also get to meet the mother. Duh. Which we do. However, and this is stuff that I got really mad at the series finale of How I Met Your Mother for reasons I'm about to go into. But the information that I had at that time was that the series finale for How I Met Your Mother was something that the showrunners knew was going to be the ending from the very beginning, right? And they were building and working their way to it the whole time. However, the show became something different over the course of, I forget how many seasons long How I Met Your Mother is, but anyways, over the course of its run, it became something different and the expectations changed. So like if you watch season 1 and you cut immediately to the series finale, however many seasons later, yeah, that makes sense. But with all the interim seasons, the characters went through so much that an ending worthy of those characters that would feel satisfying and pay off everything we've been through needed to be different than the original idea of ending. So I guess I'll go ahead and go with the spoiler. Yes, you meet the mother, but as soon as Ted in the story gets to meet the mother, like really at the very end, you actually get to see them meeting for the first time. Within the next episode or two, you then like see their life pass before their eyes, and you realize they got a really short amount of time together, had 2 kids before she died of cancer. Like, yes, you were seeing her throughout the whole season leading up to that moment, but there was just like, you don't kill the mother we've been waiting to meet for almost a decade. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. And then it ends up that he's asking his children's permission by telling them this story. He's asking their permission to go ask out the other character that he had been on again, off again with for years. And it's like, are you kidding me? We're back to this. You grew past this. You grew past this years ago. Like, what is happening? And I feel like that's kind of what happened with Game of Thrones. There's this kind of like, the show was going one way, and if you followed its natural progression and you actually let the seeds that were already planted grow, different things would have happened this season. Not necessarily everything would have been different, but like this most recent episode, the Battle of King's Landing, I think the episode was called The Bells, which is just like, oh, the bells. Things would have been different. And the payoffs that they're trying to like force feed down our throat, in my mind, are plausible. However, they have not spent enough screen time to lay the groundwork for them to make sense. So like, I'm going to talk about Daenerys Targaryen for a second. And apparently the showrunners argued they've been laying the groundwork for her delving into madness this whole time. And little caveat, I have not binge watched the entirety of Game of Thrones recently. This is just me going off of watching it like a normal human being for the past few years and not rewatching it over and over again before each new season. So I'm going off of the stuff that is just dusty in my memory, which, in my opinion, like if it doesn't work with that, you're doing something wrong. Like if you have to binge watch a whole show to get all those nuanced details for this payoff to work, you're doing something wrong as a writer. So back to Daenerys going mad, because I totally see her being power hungry, like not being necessarily worthy of her power. Like at first she's the underdog and you're rooting for her, but then you see her going dark, but like normal tyrant who doesn't quite deserve their power dark, not mad. I feel like those are 2 entirely separate freeways, and she was on the tyrant freeway, and then all of a sudden, in this last episode, she just jumped the rail and is in the craziness territory, and it's just like, oh man, people, no. And the seeds were there to maybe show that she was going crazy. Like she just lost Ser Jorah, she lost Missandei, she lost a second dragon, and she was rejected by the love of her life. That's a lot. But how much screen time did we actually get to see her react to those things? Like a couple minutes, right? And it's the kind of acting where they're not doing anything. She's staring at Ser Jorah being burned on the pyre. She's standing in her dark bedroom, not having eaten for days. They made her makeup look like she was like not eating, not sleeping. That's not acting. For that kind of stuff to come through, she needs to be put in other situations where she'll make different choices, right? But we didn't get the opportunity to have enough of that to lead up to her going crazy and having all this unsated bloodlust that led her to decimate King's Landing. Like I see the trail of breadcrumbs between point A and point B from where George R.R. Martin left off and where they were trying to go. But they didn't connect them all the way. It was like an incompleted bridge. And that's why it was so unsatisfying. So that's that. Oh man, I've been talking for almost 20 minutes now. So if this kind of stuff is things that you guys are interested in me talking about. I might, once again, talk more about Game of Thrones next week after the final episode, because I'm a completionist, and even though I feel betrayed by how bad it was, I'm gonna watch the final episode. They could maybe magically pull a rabbit out of their hats and it might tie everything together and be satisfying, but I highly doubt it. But even as I was watching the episode, like, I posited a really interesting thing. Like, imagine if they had actually set up Daenerys' fall into madness really well. Like, just magic wand, that was fixed, and you saw it coming, and you were both like horrified, but you were like ready and you're anticipatory of it because like you love to hate her kind of a situation. Imagine that was all done perfect. And then we get over here and we see Arya and the Hound, and they're on their separate mission, each to get their own vengeance, right? And what if we actually got to have the scene between Arya and Cersei? Like, I feel robbed that we never got to have that scene. Drives me nuts. But imagine if we got to have it and it was perfect. And imagine Clegane Bowl was more satisfying than what we got. Because trapping them on a stairwell while a building's falling apart around them just made for, in my opinion, really boring fight choreography. Like, I don't know. I was done with that scene pretty quickly. Again, that's my opinion. Imagine all that happened, but Daenerys and is Drogon the last dragon that's left? Imagine that they were still dealing with the fleet in the bay at this point in time. And then it's Arya's job to ring the damn bells. And she, like, this is not good Game of Thrones writing. This is just me positing, right? Because this is just like how my brain works, and I go for like Hollywood entertainment. I'm not the ideal writer for a Game of Thrones type show, because that's just like not my wheelhouse. But this is just me theorizing. And it was this like race to the clock, and maybe Arya finally gets there and she rings the bells. But you know it's pointless because Daenerys is going to go crazy and burn everything down. Like, I thought that would have been much more interesting than what we actually got. Oy, and don't get me started on Jaime. No, just don't. So long story short, I think the theory behind George R.R. Martin being a pantser and the HBO showrunners being plotters and how they tried to reverse engineer a satisfying ending, that makes sense to me. But I don't think that justifies just how bad this season has been, especially the most recent episode. And then this goes to this whole other thing where Game of Thrones, one of the things that is excellent about it is it isn't plotted. Like, it's natural. There is no chosen one. Like, we're very used to these like prophecies in epic fantasy, the chosen one, you know, Frodo and Sam and Aragorn and all that kind of stuff. We're used to that. We're fed it. We expect it. And that's why Game of Thrones was so compelling. It's because it was something so different. Like, you couldn't have the Red Wedding in Lord of the Rings. It doesn't work. But I feel like all of the sudden, we're getting a Lord of the Rings ending to Game of Thrones. And it just clashes. And this goes to the greater thing where this kind of naturally grown storytelling, that's life. Life doesn't get wrapped up in a neat bow for an ending, right? It just doesn't happen. So forcing it into quote unquote satisfying ending doesn't work. So if I were thinking critically about it and trying to write my own ending to this series, I would be like, oh, I'm going to end it, but it's not an ending, if that makes sense. It has to leave things unfinished, leave things unsatisfied. I feel like the payoff is not necessarily paying things off. Does that make sense? Because I feel like that's one of the things about this show that has been so satisfying, is that it feels so real and organic, and there's never been a neat little bow on anything, and I feel like they're trying to force one onto the story, and that's kind of not how the Game of Thrones work. So that's my soapbox about that whole thing. If you guys have any further questions, I'll probably be talking about the next episode next week. I'm horrified. Maybe I'll hop on live after I watch it Monday night. just give like a panorama of my faces. My boyfriend says my faces while watching this most recent episode were the most entertaining part of his evening. So apparently I was more entertaining than the episode, which is saying something. So yeah, this has been great. It's been fun having some people on live watching for once. Usually I'm just talking to the void. So thank you for sticking around, and talk to y'all next week. Oh yeah, and like my business Facebook page, Accountability Muse, because I'll be switching these lives every Thursday to that instead of my personal page. Yeah, after So Swing, I'll be like in bed all day Monday, and then I'll watch it Monday night. So yeah. Anyways, it's been great talking to you guys. Have a good night, and I'll be back next week, probably more horrified about Game of Thrones than I am now. Super excited. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.